Hello, I'm Chris Hartwell, and welcome to The Heartbeat. Today we're going to be talking about episode 9 of season 6 of HBO's Game of Thrones. Join me, won't you? So, as this review wears on, you actually might see me getting more and more sweaty and more flushed, and the reason for that, yes, partially comes from the fact that this was a pretty stellar episode, and there is a lot to nerd out about in it, or as director Jon Snow would put it, get sweaty over. But also, it is currently 108 degrees outside, and there is no AC in my house. So let's just be with me, guys. Be with me in the sweatiness, and let's knuckle through this. And I really am excited to knuckle through it, because this is kind of an amazing episode to talk about. Now, one of my favorite things about television, one of the things I've grown to appreciate about it more and more as years have gone on, is just the fact that it allows for episodes like this one. And no, presently, I'm not actually referring to the two unprecedentedly huge epic battles in this episode, because obviously films can do the same thing as this episode in that regard. Though, oh my gosh, this episode definitely gave them a run for their money, and we will be talking about those battles more in just a moment. What I am referring to right now is TV's unique ability to present characters that we, the audience, have gotten to watch change, grow, and evolve over years. And when a show does it right, it can make reunions or returns to a character's place of origin extremely rewarding, and able to do so even in spite sometimes of a rather clunky season. So, for example, the meeting between Dany and Yara, I thought to be rather quickly sprinted too. Even just looking at the map and the distance that the Greyjoys had to travel to get there, well, on second thought, let's not look at the map, it will just confuse us. But even with that shortcoming, or the comparative ease of that journey, or the effortless way that they got an audience with Dany, which just so happened to be perfectly timed with her return to the throne, as well as her defeat of the Slavers and her accruing of their massive fleet, but not a perfectly massive fleet. Even with all of that, I couldn't deny how narratively satisfying it was to have Theon and Tyrion once again in a scene together, the latter talking about the former's past jabs at his stature, as he now quite literally stood over him. And whether it could have been teed up better or not, I still found it such a joy to watch, just in how with a few mere lines and looks, it reminded me of how dynamically these characters had changed since we'd started this journey with them all those years ago. But even more rewarding than that reunion was actually probably the first time interaction between Yara Greyjoy and Daenerys Stormborn Targaryen. It was just one of those moments where some of the annoying conveniences and some of the kind of unfortunate breathless development that had led up to that point sort of fell to the wayside, as I saw the writers just utilize the compelling and established histories of both of those characters to form a believable connection between the two of them. It wasn't just the fact that their fathers had failed their kingdoms, it was the fact that their fathers had failed them, allowing their lives to be filled with these brutish men who sought to control them, and that they shared those things and recognized them really made that scene and their relationship work. Not to mention just the fantastic fun it was to see those two worlds with such different signature color and lighting in the same room together. And the director, cinematographer, and production designer even endeavored to maintain those looks by placing Dany and Tyrion in front of warmer tones and Theon and Yara in front of cooler tones. And just kind of the overall success that the writers and director had in that scene, and indeed the entire episode, was actually kind of in an interesting way connected to the overall theme of the episode, which, as Jon put it, was, no, it's not enough. It's what we have. Or again, as Jon asked Melisandre, what kind of god would do that? She responded, the one we've got. Now, I have been relatively outspoken in my just general displeasure of this season, and kind of just its decline in exciting, nuanced, or daring storytelling, sort of replaced by more predictable, safe Hollywood writing, as it were. But going into this episode, which I was well aware would include these long-awaited battles, even as I knew it could have been and should have been teed up by this season with more character development, more unpredictable twists and turns, more satisfying resolutions, and stronger pacing, I also just had to face the fact that all of that was in the past, and what I wanted this season to be just wasn't, and there was nothing I could do about it. And the best I could do, as those opening title sequences came to a close and the episode began, was just accept what the season had given me prior, and really hope and pray that it can make the most of it for this long-awaited episode. And I've gotta say, guys, in so many ways, this episode really did make the most of it, and really was the strongest writing that we had seen all season long, and a prime example of David and DB writing more of a mainstream show, yes, but actually writing that kind of show well. And all the happenings in Meereen were just prime examples of that, and also significantly altered what I thought the writers were going to be doing with Dany in the subsequent seasons, because ever since episode 6 of this season, we saw in such close proximity images of the Mad King screaming, "Burn them all," and Dany screaming about conquest and rule, I thought perhaps the show was paving the way for the Mother of Dragons to make her own descent into madness, perhaps becoming the show's main villain. But having that scene where Tyrion so clearly spelt out those exact ideas to her, and so clearly seen them land on an and affect her to a degree that in the next scene, even as the slavers pushed all of her buttons, disrespecting, doubting, and demeaning her, she was still able to refrain from burning them all to a crisp, which, going to the dark side or not for a Targaryen, and someone who's spent a significant amount of time being indoctrinated by the wild, conquering, and domineering Dothraki, as well as possessing one or two very personal chips on her shoulder for people who enslave others, it said a lot about Dany that she would keep her cool and continue to listen to the sage advice from Tyrion. And speaking of that fellow, I have got to say I have missed Tyrion this season, and not just in the scenes that he's not in. There have been far too many scenes that he has been in where I felt like the writers were just having the character tread water, rarely allowing me to believe in his personal investment and what he was attempting to accomplish. So to be reminded that he believed in Dany and really wanted her to rule the Seven Kingdoms in a way that they needed and deserved was just a welcome return to form. And he and Dany also have the potential for such great character dynamics. Tyrion can offer up these ideas that are so counter to hers, but his approach must now evolve as he's no longer able to do so in his customary disrespectful and demeaning way. With Dany, there must be respect and even a certain degree of fear, which again just forces him to be all the more intelligent and tactful in really fun and new ways. And then to see Dany responding to that, like in the scene between her and the Greyjoys, where after Yara offered her hand before taking it, Dany looked back at Tyrion seeking his endorsement. But alas, this entire episode was not just conversations and people shaking hands. Let's talk about some battles. Now, I almost feel foolish in how I praised the beginning of the battle for Meereen last week, just in how it was set at twilight, and therefore required a much larger budget than the nighttime battle for Blackwater Bay, because this week we got a battle waged in broad daylight, and one that included really complex elements like smoke, fire, and water, and in the best possible way contained numerous shots that were very reminiscent of Peter Jackson's cinematic masterpiece, The Return of the King, from dragons flying through buildings to flaming projectiles flying into a city. And the similarities to that Middle-earth battle didn't end there either. Many of the beats of the Battle of Winterfell were the mirroring that films in some epic cinematic ways, from slow-motion horse charges to the cavalry saving the day by cutting through the enemy lines to a large beast being turned into a pincushion. And again, very much like the Battle of Meereen, though this home run of a battle could have been made into a grand slam, or the episodes prior able to get on base emotionally and narratively, I will also say again, it really felt like David and DB found their stride when it came to this new, simpler style of storytelling, giving to us not only brilliant battles, but also some solid moments between the characters beforehand. In particular, I enjoyed Jon's attempt to manipulate Ramsay only 2 scenes later, with those manipulation tactics now in the forefront of our minds, have us just feel the inevitability of Ramsay using them on our hero in far more successful ways. And that the writers could have Sansa perfectly in character warn Jon about this, and have Jon perfectly in character not know how to heed that warning without either character feeling irrational or annoying was no small feat. And I just appreciated in general how Sansa's character was handled this week, her choices really continuing to intrigue me, which leads us to this week's first Twitter question, which comes to us from Griffin Watson. Woo! Sansa and Jon have Winterfell. Now, what's their next move? Sansa's smile seems to foreshadow something, maybe? I agree, I just feel like so much that happened between Jon and Sansa this week really put into question the future of their relationship, because yes, they were both successful in defeating Ramsay, but at what cost? Will Sansa's decision to withhold her and Littlefinger's plan only lead to a further rift between them? I think so. Just watching Sansa so quickly doubt herself was so telling. Even as the Riders of the Vale were bringing her and Jon victory, watching her smile fade there for a moment really told me something. She herself was already beginning to question whether she went about doing things the right way, and whether she was being more loyal to her old mentor or to her brother. And to continue to talk about these characters, where they've come from and where they're going to, it was utterly fantastic to see Sansa and Jon return to the courtyard at Winterfell, a place that the latter had not been since season 1, and how poetic that one of the last times we saw him there, it was such a place of safety and a place where he was in control as he taught young Bran how to shoot a bow and arrow. And now to have him return to that same place and have an enemy attempting to keep him out by shooting at him with a bow and arrow. It just, in this really cool way, felt so very right. And it also, initially anyways, felt so very right that Jon would beat on Ramsay like he did. Right as our hero pounced on that character, I just thought, yes, our hero has won, and this horrible man will deserve every single blow that he receives. But as those blows just persisted and Ramsay continued to silently endure them, I began to question who was more in control in that moment. By killing Rheon, Ramsay had awoken this beast within Jon, one that may not be so willing to go back to sleep after this. And speaking of Rheon, I just found it to be an excellent choice that Sansa was actually right about her youngest brother. He was always as good as dead, Ramsay knowing just how much of a threat he posed, in that in Bran's absence, he was the rightful lord of Winterfell. Which leads me to talking about one of the most important elements of a battle, that being the moments before it. And just the way that the director built to Rheon's reveal with holding it as long as possible was one of those moments that just masterfully ratcheted up the tension. In the same way, the scenes involving Tormund and Jon and Tormund and Davos really allowed us to connect to those characters and understand just how stacked the odds were against them. And of course, the latter of those two scenes, while possessing arguably the best shot of the entire series, may well have also set into motion Melisandre's death at the hands of Davos, as he discovered a clue connected to Shireen's death at the hands of the Red Woman. Speaking of death, though, I did want to return for a moment to the character of Rheon, because that was yet another prime example of a plot development this season being both frustrating, as well as, in a way, fitting. It was frustrating for the character of Rheon, ending his storyline before we ever really got a chance to know him, but fitting for the characters of Jon and Sansa, very much affecting their storylines in a dynamic and hopefully lasting way. Which does lead me to this week's second Twitter question, which comes to us from Brooke Pablo, who asks, Ramsay, such a good shot wasted on Rheon, not Snow? Yes, let's talk for a moment about Jon's seemingly miraculous ability to avoid arrows, which can kind of be seen, in my opinion anyways, in one of three ways. One, you can just see it as bad, contrived writing, and consequently allow it to taint the episode, or just suspend your disbelief and move on. Two, you do see it as some sort of miraculous protection, which I think does have some validity considering the scene between Jon and Melisandre, where she explained how the Lord of Light uses certain people to his own often inexplicable ends. Or three, you see it as part of Ramsay's plan, because obviously it wouldn't have been enough for him just to loose his second arrow and kill Jon right after killing Rheon. He needed to destroy Jon's men as well. So, just as he used Rheon to lure Jon into his archer's range, so he used Jon to lure the rest of his men to the same place, as to create the ultimate bloodbath and pile of bodies that puts 300 to shame. And I've got to say, director Miguel Sapochnik, who also directed last season's Hard Home, just did a bang-up job choreographing all of these pieces, because one of the most important elements of any battle sequence is understood geography. So even in something as chaotic as the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan, Spielberg still stuffed that sequence full of angles, framings, and eyelines that helped to inform the viewer where the enemy was and where the heroes were in relation to them, which wasn't just about helping us, the audience, avoid a headache, all of those technical decisions really connecting to our emotional investment in the story. Because even if we're just subconsciously asking, where is this? We're still asking that question instead of engaging with and embracing the danger, the peril, and the drama, which is exactly why shots like Jon rushing through the battlefield in one uninterrupted take, quite literally knocking soldiers off their charging steeds, were just so outstanding. And of course, the entire conflict ultimately built to, in my opinion, a far more emotionally and visually powerful resurrection for the character of Jon. Just to have that very realistic, very humiliating, non-heroic moment of Jon being knocked down and trampled by his own frightened men, and to see him fight that, and to try and escape it, and to be unable to do so, and then just to see him almost resign to it and accept his death. For me, it was just so very unexpected and really lent the battle a significant amount of reality. And then to have him break through and be born again, and yet still be surrounded by the same pain, despair, and death was just a perfect representation of what he experienced in his physical resurrection back at the beginning of the season. But it wasn't just the fact that this resurrection was powerful in isolation, or even that it connected to Jon's past, but that it, perhaps in a very intentional way, mirrored Dany's final moment at the end of Season 4, and could be the show's way of teeing us up to a rather big reveal at the end of the season. So to close this review out, I actually wanted to make kind of an interesting, rather bizarre, I can't believe I'm making this comparison, between Ramsay's hounds and myself as a Game of Thrones fan. Now, to be clear, I haven't always loved every single moment of this show and just unquestioningly sung the praises of its showrunners, David and DB, but by and large, I have really enjoyed what they've fed me in seasons 1 through 5, and it is quite interesting how quickly I felt myself turning on them as I felt starved by certain storylines this season, declaring that they've stopped trying or that they're exponentially weaker writers without Martin's books as their guides. All this to say, it was just a nice moment for me to realize that I don't want to be like Ramsay's hounds, and I don't want to so quickly turn on the show and its showrunners, men who have for so long poured themselves into it and really just sought to give us quality entertainment and substantive television. So that's kind of where I'm at with all of that. Anyways, those are my thoughts on this week's episode of Game of Thrones. I would love to know what you guys thought of the episode. What specifically are you looking forward to in the finale? Any specific revelations that you really want to see happen, or specific plot twists that you really want to occur before this season closes out? Definitely comment below and let me know. I also wanted to take a second longer to give a shout out to one of our Twitter question authors, Brooke Pablo. Brooke is actually one of the few that's currently supporting me on patreon.com. So Brooke, just Oh, thank you so much. It really means the world to me that you would not only invest your time and effort into watching my content each week, but that you would actually support me financially. And if anyone else is interested in what Brooke is doing by supporting me on patreon.com and some of the rewards that can go along with that, I will definitely leave a link for that below. Finally, please do subscribe. I'm going to continue to review films and television on this channel, and I would love for you to stay up to date on all of those things. But for now, I'm Chris Hartwell. This is The Heartbeat. Thank you for joining me.